August 2009, a man was tortured for days before his body was burned in a trash can. His killer, Angela Simpson, felt nothing but satisfaction. And now, locked away behind bars, she's a nightmare that still walks. These are the stories of 10 of the most feared women in prison.
First of all, women generally don't commit crimes this heinous.
Right.
This is usually the domain of men.
That's unfortunate.
You think more women?
Oh yeah, equal opportunity, definitely.
When you think of people who are feared, killers often come to mind first. But there's a unique wickedness in those who target the most vulnerable. Janine Jones is one such person, with some estimating that she was responsible for the deaths of over 60 infants.
You should have to serve 1 year for every year of life you robbed from the that you murdered.
I often wonder how a person can sleep at night after taking so many helpless lives.
July 13th, 1950, born in Texas, Janine Jones was adopted by a nightclub owner and his wife. She initially worked as a beautician before deciding to attend nursing school in the late 1970s. However, what should have been a nurturing career quickly turned into a nightmare for those who crossed her path. As a licensed vocational nurse at Bexar County Hospital, now known as the University Hospital of San Antonio, Jones worked in the pediatric intensive care unit. Under her care, an alarming number of patients began to die, sparking concern amongst her colleagues, who knew there was simply too much going on that medical science couldn't explain. Bexar County Hospital began a series of private investigations shortly to determine the cause of these unexplained deaths. In the meantime, more patients at the pediatric intensive care unit continue to suffer and sometimes die from unexplained medical problems. Time and again, the problems developed on the 3 to 11 nursing shift when Janine Jones was on duty. Around cafeteria tables and in hallways, a growing number of people who suspected that something was terribly wrong began calling Janine's hours on duty the death shift. Between May and December of 1981, the hospital's final internal report revealed that 10 patients had died after sudden and unexplained complications. In each case, Jones was there at the patient's bedside during what the report cautiously called the final events. Now, while this report did suggest that her presence could be coincidental, it also noted that negligence or wrongdoing could not be ruled out. Despite this, hospital administrators chose not to alert the authorities as they were fearful of lawsuits and negative publicity. Instead, they allegedly destroyed records of her activities, making it nearly impossible to determine the full extent of Jones's crimes. So after leaving Bexar County Hospital, Jones took a position at a pediatrician's clinic in Kerrville, Texas. It was here that her reign of terror finally came to an end. A doctor in the office discovered 2 puncture marks in a bottle of succinylcholine, a powerful paralytic drug that causes temporary paralysis and can lead to cardiac arrest and This bottle, to which only Jones and the doctor had access to, had been tampered with. Jones was arrested, but she initially denied all charges. In this interview after her arrest, she said,
"I always cry when babies die. You can almost explain away an adult death. At least you can say they've had a full life. When a baby dies, they've been cheated. They've been cheated out of a hell of a lot."
But no one believed those crocodile tears. 1984, Jones was convicted of the murder of Chelsea McClellan and the near-fatal poisoning of several others. She was sentenced to 99 years in prison. However, her time behind bars has been anything but simple. Housed at the Lane Murray Unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, Jones was initially scheduled for mandatory release in 2018 due to a Texas law aimed at reducing prison overcrowding. The prospect of her release sent shockwaves throughout the community and the families of her victims. In a desperate attempt to keep her locked up, new charges were filed against Jones in 2017 for the murder of Joshua Sawyer, a crime she had committed in 1981. This legal maneuver succeeded, and in 2020, Jones pled guilty to the murder, receiving a life sentence.
Jeannie Jones, the pediatric nurse turned convicted baby killer, has pleaded guilty to another murder charge. She's the so-called angel of death, accused of killing babies who were in her care.
She'll not be eligible for parole until she's roughly 87 years old, ensuring that she'll likely spend the rest of her life behind bars.
Even though my brother's in a box, she's going to spend the rest of her life in a box too. So I can smile today knowing that.
Inside the prison, Jones is infamous not only for the horror of her crimes, but also for the fear she instills in those around her. Even among hardened inmates, she's regarded with a mix of revulsion and dread. Inmates often view those who target her as a special kind of evil, and Jones fits that category perfectly. Her cold, calculating demeanor and the sheer number of lives she took have solidified her place as one of the most feared women in the prison system. Sadly, Janine Jones isn't the only woman on this list today who killed the very people she was supposed to care for. Gwendolyn Gale Graham and Catherine May Wood are also notorious for their gruesome crimes, having been convicted of killing 5 elderly women at the Alpine Manor nursing home in Walker, Michigan, where they both worked as nurses' aides. 1986. What began as a friendship quickly turned into a romantic relationship, but just 2 years later their twisted bond led them both to face murder charges. The details of these horrific crimes largely came from Catherine, whose murder charges were reduced as part of a plea deal so she could testify against Graham during the trial. January 1987. According to Wood's account, Graham entered the room of an elderly woman suffering from Alzheimer's disease and smothered her with a washcloth, while Wood stood guard. The woman, too incapacitated to resist, became their first victim. Her death appeared natural, so no autopsy was performed. Wood claimed that Graham committed the murder to relieve her tension, but she liked the feeling so much that she wanted to kill again. Over the following months, according to Wood, Graham took the lives of 4 more elderly patients at Alpine Manor. These victims, ranging in age from 65 to 97, were also suffering from Alzheimer's or other incapacitating conditions. Wood testified that the pair turned their heinous acts into a twisted game, initially trying to select victims whose initials would spell out murder. When that became difficult, they started counting each murder as a day, as in the phrase, "I will love you forever in a day." A poem Wood wrote to Graham, introduced during the trial, concluded with the chilling line,
"You'll be mine forever in 5 days."
Wood also would testify that Graham kept souvenirs to relive the murders, though no such items were ever found by the police. Nevertheless, Wood continued painting Graham as this dominant force in the relationship, both sexually and emotionally. Their gruesome partnership eventually ended when Graham began seeking another female nursing aide at Alpine Manor. Graham would then move to Texas with her new partner and take a job at a hospital caring for infants. 1988. The investigation into the murders began after Wood's ex-husband, who had been informed about the killings by Woods herself, went to the police. Detectives from the Walker Police Department conducted a series of interviews with Wood, who gradually revealed her version of events, casting Graham as this mastermind and hands-on killer. The investigation led to the exhumation of 2 victims who had not been cremated. The examination would fail to reveal clear evidence of homicide, so the county medical examiner ruled the deaths as homicides based on Wood's statements. By December 5, 1988, Graham and Wood were both arrested and charged with 2 murders. During the trial, Wood struck a plea bargain, claiming that Graham had planned and carried out the killings while she merely acted as a lookout or distracted supervisors. Graham, however, maintained her innocence, insisting that the alleged murders were part of an elaborate mind game orchestrated by Wood. But despite the lack of physical evidence, the jury was ultimately swayed by the testimony of Graham's new girlfriend, who stated that Graham had confessed to 5 murders. November 3, 1989, Graham was found guilty of 5 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy to murder, receiving 5 life sentences. Wood, on the other hand, was charged with 1 count of second-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 20 years on each count and was released on January 16, 2020.
She's a serial killer and she could do it again. And most of them do. I wouldn't want my grandchildren or elderly parents being around her.
However, the story doesn't end here. Friends, co-workers, family members, and others who knew Graham and Wood shared a very different narrative from the one Wood presented. They described Wood as a coercive and manipulative pathological liar who took pleasure in causing chaos in others' lives. They said that Wood had planned the first murder after discovering Graham with another woman. She allegedly involved Graham as this insurance policy to prevent her from leaving. So when Graham left her anyway, Wood was willing to risk everything, including her own freedom, by going to the police as an act of revenge. What's more, psychological testing revealed that Graham was easily manipulated, would also suffer from borderline personality disorder, and would lack the cunning to plan such a series of murders, let alone defend herself adequately in court. Wood also allegedly told fellow inmates 2 conflicting versions of events. One in which she was fabricating the entire story to imprison Graham for life after she left her, and another in which she admitted to committing all the murders herself and framing Graham out of spite. But to this day, no one knows for certain which version of the story is true. Why don't you share your opinion in the comments? Who do you think deserves the title of the most feared woman in prison? Wood or Graham? Jokes aside, whoever preys on the defenseless, especially the elderly, deserves a spot on this list. This next woman could easily give Graham and Woods a run for their money.
De las pistas que la autoridad dice tener, los asesinatos de las personas de la tercera edad no cesan.
2005. Police in Mexico City faced a criticism for dismissing claims that a series of murders targeting elderly women were the work of a serial killer. To their shock, turned out that not only was there a serial killer, but it was a woman, Juana Barraza. By day, she was a popcorn vendor. On occasion, a wrestler known as the Lady of Silence in Mexico City amateur wrestling circuit. But in the shadows of the city, she lived a double life as Matavietas, or Little Old Lady Killer. Starting in 2003, Barraza would gain access to the homes of elderly women by pretending to help them with groceries or posing as some government representative offering medical aid. Once inside, she would select a weapon, stockings or a telephone cord, and strangle her victims. Her method was chillingly systematic. She acquired a list of women on government assistance, targeting those who lived alone and using fake credentials to pose as a nurse sent to check on their vital signs. By the time she left, her victim's blood pressure was always 0/0. The brutality of her crimes was matched by her need to take trophies. Before leaving the crime scene, Barraza often took a small personal memento from her victim, like a religious trinket, as a way to relive her violence. Police had theories initially misleading them, suspecting a male with a confused sexual identity as the killer.
Ancha, manos grandes.
Era muy probable que se tratara de un hombre dedicado a la lucha libre.
Eyewitness descriptions of a suspect with a stocky build and feminine clothing led authorities to question known transvestite prostitutes. But this profiling only sparked outrage and led nowhere, allowing Barraza to continue her killing spree, which may have claimed nearly 50 lives. It wasn't until 2006 that the police caught a break. Juana Barraza strangled an 82-year-old woman with a stethoscope, and as she was leaving the scene, a tenant of the victim's home discovered the body and called the police. Thanks to the witness's timely report, Barraza was apprehended before she could escape. During interrogation, Barraza confessed to strangling at least one woman, admitting her crimes were fueled by a deep-seated anger towards elderly women, stemming from her troubled childhood. Now, her mother was an alcoholic who had given her away to an abusive older man, which in turn was the root of her hatred. Despite this, with evidence at hand, police charged Barraza with 16 murders. she was convicted and sentenced to 759 years in prison. Inside prison, Peraza remained a figure of intense interest. Despite the enormity of her sentence, we see her as a gym instructor or a taco seller to support her family. She even managed to get married and divorced while serving her sentence. Up to this point, we've seen women who commit horrific acts against the most vulnerable. But what about those who turn that same cruelty on their own offspring?
Diane's the type of woman who I think could cut your throat and then sit down and have lunch next to your body.
May 1983, Diane Downs staged a shocking crime scene by shooting her 3 children and then herself to create a story about a carjacker attacking her family. However, she failed when the 2 of them survived. At first glance, Diane Downs seemed to have a perfect life. She was married to her high school sweetheart, worked a part-time at a local thrift store, and had 3 children: Christy Ann, Cheryl Lynn, and Stephen Daniel. But behind this facade, her life was crumbling. 1980, her husband Stephen Downs divorced her, convinced that young Danny wasn't his biological child. After the divorce, Diane sought to become a surrogate mother, but failed her psychiatric evaluations twice. Now, during that time, her neglect of her children grew worse. She often left him with her parents or ex-husband without notice, showing more interest in other men than in caring for her kids. The children were often seen as unkempt and malnourished. 1981. Downs briefly found comfort in this new relationship with Robert Nick Knickerbocker. However, Nick quickly realized that Diane's were a burden that he didn't want to bear. He ended that relationship, leaving Diane desperate to win him back. Within 2 years, she did everything she could to win back his affection. And on May 19, 1983, Diane Downs pulled over on a rural road in Springfield, Oregon, and shot her children with a .22 caliber pistol. She then shot herself in the arm, claiming that a bushy-haired stranger had attacked her family during a carjacking.
I wouldn't walk in there and say, this weird person came up out of nowhere and shot us for no reason and just left. I mean, that's not a believable story. If I had done this, I could have come up with a believable story. It really happened.
With Cheryl dead, Danny paralyzed from the waist down, and Christy suffering a stroke that impaired her speech, authorities initially believed her story. But when Christy recovered, she revealed the truth. Her mother was the shooter. Downs initially denied owning a gun, but a search revealed otherwise. Police would also find her diary, filled with references to Nick and his reluctance to continue their relationship. February 28, 1984, Diane Downs was arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder. Prosecutors argued that she had shot her own children to be free of them and continue with her affair. Also, the prosecution psychiatrist would describe her as a narcissist, saying,
"She shows no remorse. She regards her with no empathy and as objects or possessions."
The case against Downs was heavily supported by Christy's testimony, describing how her mother had shot her and her siblings and then herself. Evidence would show that Downs drove slowly to the hospital in hopes her children would bleed out. June 17, 1984, Diane Downs was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years with no chance of parole for 25 years. Yet the judge made it clear he intended for her to never be released. Initially housed at the Oregon's Women Correctional Center, Downs escaped in July 1987 by scaling an 18-foot razor wire fence. For 10 days, she evaded massive manhunts across 14 states before being recaptured. She did receive an additional 5-year sentence for that escape, and after she was captured again, Downs was transferred to the Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey after some heavy lobbying from the lead prosecutor on the case, Fred Huggie, who had adopted Downs' 2 surviving children a year prior to the escape. The Salem prison was located 60 miles from Huggie's home, and during her 10 days of freedom, Huggie had feared that Downs would attempt to travel there in hopes of contacting Christy and Danny. Now while in prison, Downs earned an associate degree in general studies. 2008, in her first parole hearing, Downs reaffirmed her innocence. She insisted,
"Over the years, I've told you and the rest of the world that a man shot me and my children. I've never changed my story."
Her parole was denied, as it has been in every subsequent hearing, ensuring that Diane Downs remains behind bars to this day.
A psychologist once explained to me that society has this need to persecute people. They get some sort of gratification from it, so there might be something going on there.
June 4th, 2008, Jodi Arias brutally ends the life of her boyfriend Travis Alexander by stabbing him multiple times, slitting his throat, and shooting him in the head, all in his own home in Mesa, Arizona. The case quickly captivated the media, with many labeling Arias as a cold-blooded psychopath. She soon became notorious, earning the title of the most hated woman in America. 2006, Arias and Alexander's paths crossed, sparking what seemed like a whirlwind romance. But their love story quickly takes a dark and disturbing turn. It wasn't long before Alexander's friends grew wary of Arias. Noticing her unhealthy obsession, she would go as far as to convert to Mormonism just to please him. And over time, Arias' behavior became more unsettling, snooping through his emails, eavesdropping on his conversations, and even following him to the bathroom, waiting outside the door until he came out. When Alexander tried to end that relationship, her obsession only deepened. She continued inserting herself into his life, often showing up uninvited at his home. Her jealousy escalated when she discovered Alexander had moved on and started seeing other women. Reports say that she had harassed these women and sought revenge by slashing Alexander's car tires. This psycho was trying to remain connected at all costs. But now Alexander planned to attend a company retreat with his new love interest. And as this trip approached, his friends grew increasingly worried when they couldn't reach him. And they would even try to check up on him. Little did they know, Arias had already taken his life. During the investigation, police found a damaged digital camera in Alexander's washing machine. Despite the damage now, the recovered deleted images show Arias and Alexander in intimate poses just hours before his death. The last photo of Alexander alive in the shower was timestamped at 5:29 p.m. that day. Moments later, the camera captures images of him bleeding on the bathroom floor. Also, a bloody palm print on the bathroom wall contained DNA from both Arias and Alexander. From the beginning, investigators suspected Arias of the murder. Alongside the bloody handprint and photographs, they discovered that Alexander had been shot with a .25 caliber gun, the same type of weapon stolen from Arias' grandparents' house just a week before his death. When questioned, Arias initially denied being in Mesa on the day of the murder, claiming she hadn't seen Alexander since March 2008. She fabricated a story of intruders breaking into Alexander's home, killing him, and attacking her.
I witnessed Travis being attacked by 2 other individuals.
Who?
I don't know who they were. I couldn't pick them out in a police lineup.
As expected, her story was met with skepticism, and she was eventually charged with first-degree murder. In 2013, facing the death penalty, Arias changed her story yet again. This time, she says that Alexander was so mad that she accidentally dropped his camera, which led to a fight in which she killed him in self-defense. She also alleged that Alexander had been abusive throughout their relationship, a claim that was met with widespread disbelief, and she was labeled a pathological liar. May 8, 2013, the jury finds Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder.
It's my firm belief that death would bring me untold peace and freedom. That's my personal belief. If I died today, I would be free and I would be at peace.
At the hearing, Arias expressed the desire for the death penalty. However, the judge gave her life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though she did express regret for Alexander's murder during the sentencing, Arias seemed to have adjusted to life in prison now. In a 2016 recorded call, she was heard saying,
"If this is what it's like to be hated, then keep hating. I've had so much love coming in my direction, I can't even respond to it now."
As of 2024, Arias remains incarcerated at the Arizona State Prison Complex. Initially placed in maximum security, she has since been removed to medium security. Many experts, including psychologists, believe Arias exhibits psychopathic behavior and signs of borderline personality disorder. Dr. Brianna Fox, a former FBI profiler who had studied America's most prolific serial killers, teaches Jodi Arias as a topic in her criminology class, citing her as a prime example of a psychopath. Dr. Fox illustrates how Arias altered her appearance during her trial to appear more sympathetic and softened her tone when speaking to investigators to seem more docile and mousy.
Because I believe that you know some of these details. And I think you can help us.
I would love to help you in any way that I can.
Okay.
Also, psychopaths often struggle to take responsibility for their actions, believing the rules don't apply to them. Arias exemplified this mindset, claiming he attacked her first.
He was just this ball of fury coming at me, and that's what I remember.
Though Jodi Arias was only convicted of one murder, her cold-hearted actions and the chilling possibility that she could have killed again if not caught earned her a spot as one of the most feared women in prison. That also goes for the next woman on this list.
Simpson, I think, is a very scary individual. She's probably the only one in there that I take every precaution in the world to make sure my staff and myself are safe.
August 2009. Angela Simpson heartlessly torments a disabled man for 3 days because she believed he was a police informant. This horrific murder was uncovered by police in Phoenix, Arizona, when they found burned human remains in a residential trash bin that was on fire. Through fingerprint analysis, authorities identified the remains as belonging to Terry Neely, a resident of a local assisted care facility. Shortly after the gruesome discovery, Simpson, who was already in jail for a different crime, confessed to killing Neely. Her cold-hearted confession was so chilling that it served as inspiration for the fictional psychopathic hitwoman Villanelle in the thriller series Killing Eve.
I heard they said I was possessed by the devil. I think that's hilarious. Isn't that beautiful?
August 2nd, 2009. It all starts off with 46-year-old Terry Neely leaving his assisted care facility in his wheelchair. He was then lured into an apartment by 33-year-old Angela Simpson, who he apparently knew. Simpson would tell Neely she'd give him and drugs if he went into that apartment with her, but instead she would end up brutally torturing him. Over the course of 3 days, Simpson beat Neely with a tire iron, stabbed him at least 50 times with multiple knives, hammered a 3-inch nail into his head, and extracted his teeth. Simpson forced her victim to watch his own torture by placing a mirror right in front of him. As she later put it,
he needed to see what he deserved.
Eventually, Simpson slashed Neely's throat and strangled him with a TV cord, killing him in that same apartment. She then dismembered his body and tossed the remains into a nearby residential trash bin, which she then set on fire in an attempt to cover it up.
Is it hard to chop up a human body?
Nah, not really. You'd be amazed. It's quite simple, actually. You should try it. It's only a felony 6. Knock it down to a misdemeanor.
Angela Simpson had no idea that the assisted care facility where Neely lived had already reported him missing. Her attempt to dispose of his remains failed when the fire department arrived in time to recover the body parts from that bin on August 5th. So after fingerprint tests confirmed the remains belonged to Neely, the police launched an investigation into his murder. A few days later, Neely's wheelchair was found near the apartment of Edward McFarland, a friend of Simpson. A witness told police they saw smoke coming from McFarland's apartment and a City of Phoenix trash can in the kitchen. The witness would also claim Simpson and McFarland asked to borrow his car, and Simpson confessed to killing Neely and threatened the witness if he reported her. When Simpson and McFarland were questioned by police, they were already in jail for an unrelated armed robbery. August 18th, Simpson admits to killing Neely without any remorse. She claims Neely was a snitch who deserved to die because he had supposedly ratted on someone in the past, although the police had no record of Neely being an informant. Simpson, though, remained adamant that Neely got what he deserved and showed no regret for that murder. She did regret one thing, not being able to kill any more snitches. And during a 2009 interview right after her arrest, Simpson tried to justify her actions by saying,
I don't want my children or the people I consider family to be in a place where there are snitches. I believe informants and monsters should be killed. Period.
March 22, 2012. Simpson ended up pleading guilty to first-degree murder. She was given life in prison with no chance of parole. And on the day of her sentencing, Simpson had an interview in which she said she didn't mind getting a life sentence.
You know, I got a lot of family in prison. It's really not that much of a punishment to be sentenced to spend my life with my family.
When asked if she'd kill again, Simpson straight up said,
"If the opportunity arises, I hope so."
To this day, Simpson hasn't shown any regret for taking an innocent life. She's still locked up, serving out her life sentence.
I'm overrun with remorse. Justice. Justice is lovely.
At just 12 years old, the British media would call Sharon Lewis Carr the devil's daughter. She'd cold-heartedly stabbed a stranger to death for no apparent reason, and later bragged about the murder to friends, family, and in her prison diary entries. December 21, 1979, born in Belize, Carr grew up in extreme poverty, raised by a mother and stepfather as one of 4 children. In 1986, the family moved to Camberley, Surrey, England. But life wouldn't get easier. Soon after settling in, her parents' marriage crumbled, in which Sharon's mother poured boiling fat over Sharon's stepfather. The incident caused the couple to be hospitalized with burns and Sharon's mother charged with assault.
Her mother was a volatile personality herself, and things went on that the young Sharon Carr saw that may have, affected her own personality.
At first, Sharon seemed like a polite and sociable girl. However, there were flashes of aggression that hinted at something darker. As time passed, her behavior worsened. She became disruptive, attention-seeking, and struggled with authority. By 1990, her head teacher at Cordwall's junior school was so concerned that social services were contacted. Sharon was briefly placed in foster care, but returned home just after a month, a move that did nothing to improve her behavior. In fact, it might have pushed her closer to the edge. On June 7, 1992, Carr randomly targets and brutally murders 18-year-old apprentice hairdresser Katie Ratcliffe as she walked home. Using a 6.5-inch knife, Carr stabbed Ratcliffe 32 times in her ribs, heart, and private parts. Afterward, Carr stole some of her jewelry, and with the help of accomplices, dragged her body to Farnborough, where they dumped it by a cemetery wall. The brutality of this attack led police to believe the killer was a grown man, given the sexually motivated nature of the crime and the severity of the injuries, and as a result, the case initially went unresolved, and the real killer, Sharon Carr, returned to school undetected. And Carr wasn't done. June 7, 1994, exactly 2 years later, she attacked her classmate, Anne-Marie Clifford, stabbing her in the back and puncturing her lung in the school's bathroom. 5 other students would intervene and stop the attack. When Carr was arrested, she admitted she enjoyed stabbing animals, even claiming to have beheaded a dog. Even during her medical assessment, she tried strangling 2 staff members, leading to additional charges. Eventually, she was sent to the Bullwood Hall Young Offenders Institution. In prison, Carr's dark side fully emerged. She openly discussed the Ratcliffe murder with friends and family, both in phone calls and in her diary, where she expressed sexual excitement at the thought of Ratcliffe's death. Her diary entries were filled with disturbing comments, such as,
"If only I could kill you again. I promise I'd make you suffer more this time, you fucking slag."
She also admitted to attacking a prison officer she had a crush on and expressed her desire to kill again as she wrote,
"I'm a killer. Killing's my business, and business is good."
Police seized her writings and drawings, which included graphic details of Ratcliffe's murder. Carr eventually confessed to the crime, and in May 1996, she was charged and convicted of Ratcliffe's murder, receiving a minimum sentence of 14 years.
Passing sentence, Mr. Justice Scott Baker told Carr, "It is clear that killing, in your words, turns you on. You are a very dangerous young woman." As Sharon Carr left the dock, she was smiling.
Following her conviction, Carr was sent to Broadmoor Hospital, where she continued to display violent behavior, attacking staff and other inmates. She even thought she was a lizard and would try cutting herself to see if she was still human. Due to the risk she posed, Carr was transferred to the HM prison Bronzefield, where her violent tendencies and paranoid thoughts persisted. She would express desires to kill people in prison. And as of today, Sharon Lewis Carr remains imprisoned. Her minimum sentence long expired, but her ongoing violence ensures she stays behind bars.
She was pure evil as well, and that's why the public has to be protected from her. In my opinion, she should never be released.
And just like Sharon Carr, this next woman on the list wanted to see what it would be like to be a killer and went on her killing spree. Sadly, she wasn't caught until she had taken many lives. March 2013. Joanna Dennehy goes on a 10-day killing spree, taking the lives of her date, roommate, and landlord before trying to murder 2 more men she randomly encountered. Why? Simply because she liked how it felt.
She is the most dangerous woman in the British prison system.
August 1982, born in St. Albans, Hertfordshire, Dennehy had a troubled life from the start. At 16, she ran away with her 21-year-old boyfriend. When she unexpectedly became pregnant at 17, she was filled with anger and resentment. Motherhood wasn't something she wanted, and after her daughter was born, Dennehy spiraled into a life of substance abuse, self-harm, and reckless behavior. She funded her addictions through sex work, which only deepened her hatred toward men. By February 2012, Dennehy's troubles would reach a breaking point. Arrested for theft, she was admitted to a hospital for psychiatric treatment and diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and OCD. Just over a year later, she embarked on her chilling killing spree. It all begins with Łukasz Szlabaziuszki, a 31-year-old man she had recently met in Peterborough. After drinking together, Dennehy lures him to another property owned by her landlord. Szlabaziuszki thought he was meeting his new girlfriend, but Dennehy had other plans. She would stab him in his heart and dispose his body in a dumpster. 10 days later, she strikes again, killing her 56-year-old housemate, John Chapman, in the same brutal manner. Just hours after that, she kills her landlord, 48-year-old Kevin Lee, with whom she was having an affair. To humiliate him further, she made him wear a black sequin dress before taking his life. Dennehy didn't work alone. We have Gary Richards and Leslie Layton helping her transport and dump the bodies in ditches. Later, they would claim they only helped because they were terrified of her. And with good reason. Dennehy, though petite, was intimidating enough to scare men nearly 2 feet taller than her. So on their way back from dumping the last 2 victims, the trio takes a road trip out west to the town of Hereford in search of more people for Dennehy to murder. During this drive, Dennehy turns to Richards and says,
"I want my fun. I need you to get my fun."
In Hereford, they found 2 men, John Rogers and Robin Bereza, walking their dogs. Dennehy would stab Bereza in the shoulder and chest before stabbing Rogers over 40 times. Fortunately, both men survived the attacks thanks to quick medical assistance, and later identified Dennehy during her trial. So, how was she caught? 2 days after she killed Kevin Lee, his family reported him missing. They eventually found his body in a ditch where Dennehy had left him. The police quickly identified her as a person of interest, but when they tried to question her, she fled with Richards. It only took 2 days for authorities to track him down, and Dennehy's arrest would amuse her more than anything else. She laughed, cracked jokes, and even flirted with the male officer processing her.
You're very distinctive eyebrows.
I know, that's what you keep saying.
While awaiting trial, police discovered her diary, revealing an escape plan involving cutting off a guard's finger to use his fingerprint for the security system. As a result, she spent 2 years in solitary confinement until after the court proceedings. Dennehy pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life in prison, with the judge ordering that she'd never be released. And after her sentencing, she was sent to HMP Bronzefield. In 2018, Dennehy requested permission to marry her cellmate, Haley Palmer. much to the dismay of Palmer's family, who feared Dennehy would harm her. When their wish wasn't granted, both Dennehy and Palmer tried killing themselves during a suicide pact. In 2019, Dennehy was moved to the Low Newton prison in County Durham, where she allegedly threatened to kill the next scary woman on this list. 1972. Rosemary Rose West marries Fred West, and together they become two of the most notorious serial killers in the UK, responsible for the gruesome murders of at least 9 women, including 2 members of their own family.
I've never for one moment doubted that Frederick West was a truly evil man. But he found in Rose the perfect sorcerer's apprentice.
November 29, 1953, in Northam, Devon. Rose grows up in a troubled household as the 5th of 7 children in a poor family. She grows up pretty moody as a teenager, struggling in school and often lost in daydreams. After her parents would separate, Rose lives with her mother before moving in with her father, who was really violent and sexually abusive. Well, that abuse deeply affects Rose, leading her to act out in disturbing ways, including molesting her younger brothers and harassing boys in her village. In early 1969, at the age of 15, Rose met Fred West at a bus stop in Cheltenham. Despite being initially repulsed by Fred's unkempt appearance, she soon found herself flattered by his attention. The two quickly started a relationship, and Rose would move in with Fred, becoming a full-time nanny to his 2 children from a previous marriage. To keep her parents in the dark, Fred gave Rose money to pass off as her salary from a job she had quit. When Rose finally introduced Fred to her family, they were horrified by her choice. Her mother saw through Fred's lies and arrogance, while her father vehemently disapproved, even threatening Fred and promising to call social services. But Rose defied her parents, and after turning 16, she moved in with Fred and soon married him, despite everyone's objections. Shortly after their marriage, Fred was sent to prison, leaving 17-year-old Rose to care for his stepdaughter, Charmaine, and their newborn daughter, Anne-Marie. Now, the pressure of caring for these children seemed to trigger Rose's violent tendencies. Well, she grew to despise Charmaine, especially for her rebelliousness, and the girl would go missing in the summer of 1971. Rose coldly claimed,
"Gone to live with her mother, and bloody good riddance."
Later, the child's mother, Raina West, came to look for her, but then she went missing as well. This would become a recurring theme in the West household. Meanwhile, Rose began doing work in their home while her husband watched once he returned from prison, and soon after, the horrors really started.
He was a man capable of absolutely no conscience and absolutely no remorse. And everything he did was with Rose's help.
From their modest home at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, the Wests lured vulnerable women, offering them rides or a place to stay. And once inside, these women would likely never leave again. Even the Wests' own children weren't spared. Rose's biological daughters and son endured horrific abuse, including beatings, rapes, and ultimately murder as well. Behind typical family outings and seemingly normal public life, the West household carried on in this horrific way for many years. That was until Heather, the couple's eldest mutual child, disappeared. Rose claimed that Heather had left on her own, saying,
"She's not disappeared. She's made a conscious decision to leave. Heather was a lesbian, and she wanted a life of her own."
However, a dark joke from Fred about misbehaving children ending up under the patio like Heather hinted at the truth. When social workers investigating potential abuse heard the children express fears of ending up like Heather, they alerted the police. 1994, police investigates the cellar, the garden, the patio, and beneath the floor in the bathroom, and find the remains of Heather, 8 other females, and the bodies of Charmaine and her mother Raina. By this time, Fred and Rosemary West had been operating as a sadistic team for the last 25 years.
It's horrible to think that there are, dead bodies in a garden just down the road. It's just thoroughly disgusting. I mean, it's horrifying to think. Totally shocking.
Initially, Fred took all the blame for the murders, while Rose played innocent, telling her daughter,
"That Man, May, the trouble he caused me over the years. And now this? Can you believe it?
But it soon became clear that Rose was equally responsible. 1995, she was sentenced to life in prison. Fred avoided a similar fate by committing suicide in jail, leaving behind a note calling himself Freddie, the mass murderer from Gloucester. Rose was jailed at HM Prison Bronzefield in Middlesex as a Category A prisoner, but was later transferred to HM Prison Low Newton in County Durham. May 1995, rumors circulate that Rose had formed a romantic relationship with fellow serial killer Myra Hindley, but both women denied the claims, acknowledging only that they knew each other from being in the same prison wing. 2019, Rose moves up to HM Prison's new hall in West Yorkshire. Reports say that transfer was due to threats from none other than Joanna Dennehy, who had just been transferred to Low Newton and allegedly wanted to kill Rose. However, whether this is true and why Dennehy may have targeted Rose remains unclear. January 1995. Krista Pike brutally murders her classmate Colleen Slemmer in the woods of Knoxville, Tennessee, with the help of her lover, Daryl Shipp. Instead of hiding her crime, Pike flaunted it, quickly becoming the youngest woman sentenced to death in the United States. March 10, 1976, born in West Virginia. Krista Gale Pike's life was troubled from the start. Her mother, more interested in partying and drugs than raising her daughter, left Krista's upbringing to her grandmother. But when Pike's grandmother died when Krista was just 12, her world turned upside down. So now forced back to move in with her neglectful mother, Pike was introduced to marijuana as a young teenager, marking the beginning of her downward spiral. She would drop out of high school and was arrested for shoplifting, leading to a 1-month stint in juvie. And after her release, she joined the Job Corps, a program meant to help troubled youths learn a trade. But instead of focusing on her studies to become a nurse technician, Pike became obsessed with Daryl Shipp, a fellow student in the culinary arts program. Shipp, like Pike, came from a difficult background, and their relationship quickly grew intense, fueled by a shared interest in Satanism and the occult, and also attracting other Job Corps attendees, including Shadola Peterson. Then there was Colleen Slemmer, a bright and enthusiastic young woman from Jacksonville, Florida, who had come to Knoxville Job Corps to study computer technology. Now, within 3 months of Slemmer's arrival, tension between her and Pike escalated. Pike became convinced that Slemmer was trying to steal Shipp away from her, though Slemmer and her friends denied any romantic interest in Shipp. Obsessed with jealousy and revenge, Pike convinced Shipp and Peterson that Slemmer needed to be sacrificed in the name of Satan. On January 12, 1995, Pike, Shipp, and Peterson lure Slemmer into the woods with the promise of marijuana. Once there, Pike and Shipp viciously attack her, while Peterson acted as a lookout. For the next half hour, Slemmer was taunted, beaten, and slashed. Pike would even carve a pentagram in her chest, before ending her life by bludgeoning her with a large piece of asphalt. She then kept a piece of her skull as a macabre trophy.
Authorities say she was then beaten over the head with a large chunk of asphalt from this pile.
Pike's crime quickly unraveled. She couldn't resist bragging to her friends, even showing off the piece of the skull. Within 36 hours, police arrested Pike, Shipp, and Peterson. Pike waived her Miranda rights and confessed to the crime, claiming she only wanted Slemmer to leave her the hell alone. However, the brutality of that murder told a different story. Pike admitted the more Slemmer begged for her life, the more she escalated the violence.
During the interview, she's very giddy, laughed, very cooperative. She wanted to tell us all about it, but she was giddy. It was a happy thing for her. It was the greatest thing ever, and I've never seen anybody else like that.
Ultimately, Daryl Shipp was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Shadola Peterson, who testified for the state, received probation in exchange for her cooperation. Krista Pike, however, was convicted of capital murder and conspiracy to commit murder after just 2.5 hours of jury deliberation. March 30th, 1996, she was sentenced to death by electrocution.
It is therefore ordered that you shall be put to death by electrocution.
and another prescribed by law, that she shall be transferred to custody of the warden at the Tennessee Prison for Women.
To this day, she still shows no remorse for the murder of Colleen Slemmer. In fact, she wrote a troubling letter to Ship just a few days after she was sentenced to die by electrocution.
Please write me, I miss you so much. See what I get for trying to be nice to the I went ahead and bashed her brains out so she died quickly, instead of letting her bleed to death and suffer more.
And since her incarceration, Pike has proven to be anything but a model prisoner. August 2004, she was convicted of attempted first-degree murder for trying to strangle fellow inmate Patricia Jones with a shoestring. Pike later bragged to her mom about the attack, describing how she wrapped the shoestring around her and tried to choke the life out of her. March 2012, Pike was involved in an escape plot with corrections officer Justin Heflin and a New Jersey man named Donald Kohut. Although Pike was ultimately charged, Kohut was sentenced to 7 years in prison for bribery and conspiracy to commit escape, and Heflin lost his job. As of 2024, the state has not yet set an execution date for Pike. If she is executed, she'd be the first woman in nearly 200 years to be executed in Tennessee.
There is nobody that's going to take me out of this prison and send me to Disneyland to live.